My family relocated to Sunny Dell in search of quiet and calm. I understand why they did so. They have always been people of the open country who never enjoyed busy life. The city was never their taste, even though Bayview is not the largest or most hectic town around. It remains an urban spot, and when they retired, they decided to leave the bustle behind. They sold their old house and bought a small, cozy home in Sunny Dell, and things have been fine ever since. We talk on the phone every few days while they share simple news from their area. Although the updates are minor, they seem very content, so I can't complain. Every couple of months, I drive up to see them. Sunny Dell is a tiny town with roughly 200 residents, located about an hour and a half from Bayview. Apart from its unusual name, there isn't much else to note. There might be a refinery nearby, but my family lives far from it. It is a quiet spot removed from the world's problems, and maybe one day I will retire there too. The journey there is simply delightful, a trait shared with most parts of Newfoundland. Long roads stretch ahead, lined on both sides by green trees under a soft gray sky that has its own gentle charm. Some may call the scene bland, but I truly love it. I often play some music or a talk show while I drive through open country. At times, distant hills appear on the horizon, and if I can appreciate them briefly without looking away too long, I do so happily. I make sure to keep my eyes on the road, though bright yellow roadside signs with bold black text are hard to miss. They warn, "Watch for moose." Even if the wording sometimes varies, the message is clear. Slow down, because wild deer-sized creatures may cross. I haven't seen moose very often around here, though I know they still exist. In fact, I met one on the road only one time. And that event is what I'm about to recount. Truly, I feel lucky that this was my only encounter with a moose. Such meetings can quickly become dangerous, though mine did not. Many people may not fully appreciate how huge these animals are. They are massive, standing high on long, slender legs. A collision with one could easily knock the animal over and cause it to fall on your car, leading to serious damage. The roadside warnings are placed for very good reasons. Anyway, as I mentioned, that single encounter with a moose was far from ordinary. It happened in mid-September several years ago when I was driving to Sunny Dell to celebrate my father's 60th birthday. I remember it was around 7 in the evening. The sky had turned a soft purple, resembling a faint bruise, while dusk slowly set in. The road I was on branched off the main highway, twisting and curving and occasionally showing a glimpse of the sea, though thick woods still bordered it. I did not notice the animal at first until it suddenly stepped in front of my car, and thank goodness I had enough time to slow down. As the animal ambled farther into the middle of the road, I halted to watch it closely, trying to absorb its unusual look. I would have marveled if there had been something truly impressive to admire. In truth, in the fading light, this creature looked very odd, and at first I could not tell what was amiss. The longer I stared, the more strange details I noticed. I had seen these animals before, and usually a large male is not so thin, yet this one appeared extremely gaunt, as if it were merely skin stretched over its bones. I couldn't tell if that lean look was because its flesh was tight, or if its ribs were plainly visible. Its coat also seemed unusual. After a moment, I realized it was white instead of the normal dark color. I had only heard whispers of white moose being rare, yet this one looked as if it had crawled from a muddy pit. Its fur was stained and disheveled, making it seem as though it were hurt, if it was hurt at all. The animal then stopped near the center of the road, pausing as if it were confused. I fixed my eyes on it, feeling that something was seriously wrong with its condition. After a while, I realized it was looking right back at me. Its eyes appeared hollow and deep, so much so that I wasn't sure if they held any life or were simply empty. Sometimes I wondered if I was merely seeing a bare skull. Clumps of rough hair hung from its antlers in thick strips, and the antlers carried a reddish tint. The moose stared at me quietly before finally starting to move. But instead of leaving the road as I had hoped, it turned directly toward my car. I am no expert on wild behavior, yet my gut warned me that this was not a good sign. I sensed that it was preparing to lunge. It lowered its head and then advanced directly toward my vehicle. In a state of panic, I shifted my car into reverse in an attempt to turn around, but my SUV did not respond quickly enough. The animal struck my car with such force that it crumpled the trunk and lifted the rear end off the ground. I screamed loudly in shock and fear, secretly hoping for another vehicle's headlights to appear. Yet the road was completely empty. After a brief pause, the moose backed off with a shake of its head before moving into position for another impact. My rear wheels spun desperately, even though the car barely budged. It was obvious that something critical had been damaged. I managed to roll back the way I had come. Not long after, the moose hit me again, causing my SUV to fishtail and nudging me closer to the roadside. I screamed in terror, fully believing that my end was near. The animal prepared another charge, clearly aiming for the front of the car, a blow I was sure would be fatal. In desperation, I did the only thing that seemed right at the time. I got out of the vehicle. Looking back later, I realized stepping out might not have been the wisest move, but in my panic, it seemed the only option to avoid a worse fate. The moose charged a third time, crashing into my car with a tremendous crash. Later, I discovered its antlers had pierced the windshield and damaged the seat beside the driver. If I had stayed inside, I probably would have lost my life. I had exited the car, and in my frantic state, I only knew to run as fast as I could. I bolted into the nearby woods without a second thought, nearly stumbling down a slope as I dashed among the trees. When I looked back, I saw the moose staring with empty eyes, its antlers now free from my wrecked SUV. I did not clearly see it begin to chase me immediately, but I suspected it would soon. The forest swallowed me up, wrapping me in deep darkness. Even though I could still see a hint of twilight above, night had already fully come in the forest. I heard heavy footsteps echoing behind me as the moose followed, though the sound did not seem very near. Sensing that it had not yet found me, I kept moving without slowing down to avoid giving it a chance. I continued on in the direction where I last saw water glistening. I did not have a detailed plan. I merely assumed that diving into the water might help me escape the animal, even though I later learned that moose are excellent swimmers, which is a fact you can verify yourself. I cannot say exactly how long I walked, but it certainly felt like a long time. My pace slowed when I stopped hearing any noise from the animal, and although I did not feel completely safe, I took the chance to catch my breath. I did check my cell phone, but in such a remote area there was no signal, so it served only to provide a little light. After a while, I began to notice a foul odor. It smelled strongly of decay, as if something had died nearby. My first thought was that the animal might have returned, but there were no sounds to confirm this. Only a strong reek of rotten flesh filled the air. The stench was so overpowering that it nearly made me sick, prompting me to alter my path in hopes of escaping it. Unfortunately, that did not help. Perhaps it was just unfortunate luck, or maybe there was more than one source for the odor. The smell grew even stronger until I had to cover my mouth and nose with my shirt in an attempt to block it out. Nothing worked, so I picked up my speed again, hoping to leave the horrible smell behind, though that too turned out to be a mistake. After a few minutes of almost jogging, I hurried down a slope too quickly and ended up falling face first into a muddy puddle. The odor reached its peak at that moment, and I can only thank my luck that I did not vomit the dinner I had eaten earlier all over the ground. I recall that my phone slipped from my hand as I fell, yet I spotted a light nearby and fumbled to grab it again, although that might have been unwise. I had assumed I had merely fallen into ordinary mud with the same foul odor, but I was mistaken. I had actually landed in the very source of that terrible smell, which was even worse. The first thing I saw after recovering my phone was the dried, decayed body of another dead moose. This one still looked somewhat fresh compared to other remains scattered in the ravine, where older, more decomposed carcasses lay. There were remnants of moose, deer, raccoons, dogs, and cats, and I was sure I even noticed scraps of human clothing among the mess. I dared not look too closely to be sure. Countless bodies were strewn about, torn to pieces and partly eaten, with broken bones and clumps of rotten flesh scattered across the ravine. I had held back from throwing up until that point, but eventually I reached my limit. My dinner and I ended on very bad terms, left behind with the rest of the nauseating debris as I clutched the side of the ravine for support. Then I heard it again, the sound of heavy footsteps far off. The moose had come back. I pressed my hands over my mouth and became utterly silent as I listened. Glancing around, I caught occasional glimpses of its pale, decaying body moving slowly among the trees, and I felt an intense fear at the thought it might come closer. I am not a large woman, and if that animal wished it, it could have easily crushed me with its hooves, a fate that would have ended quickly. I stood frozen as the moose moved past, pausing briefly as if to sample the air before huffing and moving on. I couldn't help but wonder if the overpowering reek had kept me hidden, and in a grim moment, I even considered whether the moose was responsible for all the scattered remains. What a dreadful thought that was. After a while, the animal passed me by, and a heavy silence returned to the forest. I wasn't completely sure it had abandoned me for good, but I knew I could not remain among the decay any longer. I had struggled to climb out of that ravine, and once free, I silently thanked any power above that I had not hurt myself further. I then headed in the opposite direction of where the moose had been, and prayed that my luck would hold out a little longer. I cannot say exactly how long I wandered in the woods, perhaps an hour or more. It was still dusk when I finally broke through the trees, though the sun was very low in the sky. Before me lay the vast ocean, and I found myself in a small bay. Seabirds, puffins, and gulls were gathering along the rocks where land met water. And as I scanned the coastline, I noticed a small white house with lights shining in its windows. It wasn't very near, but I could make the walk. After one final look among the trees to ensure that the animal was not following, I headed toward the house, feeling as if the end of my nightmare was near. I hoped that whoever lived there had a working phone or any means to call for help. I would be grateful for any aid. As I approached, the sky grew even darker until the only sign of light was that glowing window, which I prayed would not go out. It was so dark and so near the shore that it was all too easy to slip on the rocks. I quickened my pace and nearly broke into a jog as I reached the final stretch, racing to the door and pounding on it before leaning against its wooden surface to catch my breath. For a few minutes, the only reply was the sound of crashing waves and birds on the rocks, but then I heard movement from inside. The door clicked as it slowly unlocked, and I was greeted by a woman wearing a simple dark blouse. Her eyes were a steely gray and seemed to show that she'd experienced much in life. Her face was slim with a sharp nose, thin lips, and her long dark hair was pulled back into a bun. She had bangles on her arms and large hoop earrings dangling, giving her a fierce look like a protective lioness. She studied me carefully before finally saying, "You're out here very late." Gratefully, I thanked her as I stepped inside. She told me that the phone was in the sitting room and asked if I would like a drink. I accepted, admitting that I had been walking for a long time. She remarked that since the highway was several kilometers away, my trek must have been very tiring, and I replied that I had no idea. I then found the phone in the living room, one of those old cordless models from the early 2000s. But when I picked it up, I discovered the battery was dead. It wasn't surprising. Soon the woman emerged from the kitchen with 2 glasses of soda and offered me one. "Thank you," I said, then asked, "Is there another phone?" "This one isn't working." She pointed to one in the kitchen and added, "Please sit down and rest for a moment." I accepted and sipped the bitter soda. "I'm sorry, I never introduced myself properly. I'm Jess. And you are?" "I'm Veronica," she replied. "So what happened to your car?" Veronica kept her steady gaze on me as I explained briefly. "I ran into a moose. I saw one on the road and stopped to let it pass, but somehow it became enraged and began striking my car repeatedly." "It attacked you?" Veronica asked in a tone that showed she had heard similar tales before. "Yes. And it was a white moose too," I added, noting its very sick appearance. "Has it done this before?" she pressed. "Many times," she replied. "That creature can be very unpredictable. In fact, I have a sort of arrangement with it. I let it take a little blood, and in return it stays near me. It is quite useful to have someone like that on my side." I was taken aback and asked, "What exactly are you saying?" She gave a small laugh and said, "It isn't something you need to worry about now. Though I must admit, I'm surprised you managed to walk through the woods. Usually the animal easily catches its target when I allow it to take its share." I looked at her in disbelief and asked, "You mean you're talking about the moose?" My words were a bit slurred, and I felt nearly intoxicated when dizziness hit me. Veronica slowly nodded. "Bruno," she stated, using the new name for the moose, though I was not sure why she chose it. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the table, staring at her in confusion while murmuring, "You drugged me." "Notice that, did you?" she asked while taking a sip of her drink. "I cannot let Bruno go without his blood before nightfall, so I must send you back out." I managed to say, "You're so predictable," before I finally passed out. Not sure why those words came out as my last coherent thought. When I came to, I found Veronica dragging me along the ground. My body would not respond, and I still felt dazed and confused. I looked up to see a thin sliver of orange light on the horizon. The sun was nearly gone. Veronica gently let me drop, then moved my body to lean against a tree. I felt her lift my arms above my head and tie them together before she began hoisting me up. "What are you doing?" I mumbled weakly. "Finishing the ritual," she replied plainly, annoyance in her tone as she saw I was awake. "Stay still." I wanted to resist, but my body would not cooperate. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the large outline of the white moose along the coast, drawing nearer. I knew Veronica had seen it too, as she glanced over with a knowing look. "I'm here, Bruno," she said, addressing the animal. "With your blood as agreed." Before she could continue, she let me drop and then presented me to the moose. I stared into its empty, hollow eyes as it came closer. "Do you see? I have kept our promise," she declared, adding, "Just as I always have. I gave you your yearly share of blood, and when it was lost, I returned it. Do you understand?" Bruno moved nearer, lowering his head as he inspected me. I returned his gaze, not out of defiance, but with true terror, as I felt these might be my final moments. Soon someone might find my wrecked car on the highway and learn of a terrible accident. Yet who would ever locate my body? I only hoped for a swift end. "Noble Bruno, feast and renew our agreement," Veronica urged as she watched us intently. As she spoke, the thin band of orange faded away until complete darkness fell. I stared close to the moose's head, its skull just inches from my face. Bruno exhaled deeply, and a rancid smell of decay overwhelmed my senses. Then he lifted his head, sniffed the air, and finally turned from me to focus on Veronica. "Bruno?" she called softly for the first time since we met, though it had been only a short while. Her voice trembled. She stepped back quickly and scanned the dark horizon, clearly understanding what that darkness meant. "Bruno, I have kept our agreement," she shouted, glaring at the animal as it advanced. "I have done my part. Take what is yours." But Bruno did not respond. I saw his body tense once more, and I knew he was about to charge. Veronica braced herself too. The animal lunged at her with great speed. I watched in horror as Veronica staggered backward and heard her cry out in fear, while Bruno lowered his antlers. Her scream soon faltered into a choked sound as the sharp tip of his left antler tore through her, ripping her body and leaving her impaled against it. Bruno then exhaled forcefully, shook his head violently, and flung her aside into a disordered heap. I could still see her twitching and faintly hear her labored breathing as she struggled to move, trying to crawl while Bruno neared. She curled into a ball, weakly raising a trembling hand as though pleading for mercy that never came. I then heard the sickening crunch of bones as his hooves struck, along with her final despairing cries. When I finally managed to move my legs a little, I decided that I had to get away while I still could. In my confused, drugged state, I recalled my foolish plan to reach the water. Struggling to stand and shuffling toward the shoreline with my hands still tied, I did not consider the impracticality of my actions. I just acted. When I reached the water's edge, I jumped, only to land harshly. I was very lucky not to have been killed by the rough fall. I tumbled over rocky ground, landing on my backside and rolling into the icy ocean. Minutes after submerging under the churning waves, I realized my hands remained bound and I could not swim properly. I blamed whatever substance Veronica had given me. I tried to hold my breath, but I couldn't, and when I surfaced, I reached desperately for the rocks, even though my grip slipped away. It was maddening. I had survived the brutal attack by the wild creature, only to drown because of my own error. The waves slammed me against the rocks again, nearly knocking me out. Darkness crept into my vision, and from the edge of my sight, I saw Bruno slowly descending the rocks above me. It became clear that the moose still posed a threat. The pounding waves forced me once more against the stones, and after that, everything went blank. I never expected to wake up again, yet when I did, I found myself on dry ground. My bindings were gone, and although I was soaking wet, I was alive. I blinked slowly while coughing up water before drawing deep, refreshing breaths of clean air. The sounds of birds and crashing waves filled the air, and I noticed the light from Veronica's house nearby. I was lying only a few feet from her door. I looked around and scanned the tree line for any sign of the animal, and it did not surprise me to see him, except he was now walking away, returning to the forest. I saw him pause briefly by the wreckage that had once been Veronica, as if to check that she was truly gone. Then he resumed his walk. After a few minutes, he disappeared completely among the trees and never reappeared. I have thought long and hard about that night, and honestly, I still do not completely understand everything that occurred. I know now that I became involved in a strange ritual intended to bind Bruno to Veronica. I had deduced that much even before I checked what Veronica kept at her home. What she gained from that ritual remains a mystery to me. She once called Bruno by a special name that hinted at his power, but I never understood what she meant. Truly, Veronica might have been using him for any purpose. "It is useful to have someone like him on your side," she had said. "Perhaps it is better that I remain unaware of her exact plans. I still cannot understand why Bruno did not kill me when he had the chance. Sometimes I suspect it was deliberate. At times, I wonder if he was merely toying with me, chasing me to see if I could stay ahead while he waited for nightfall to free himself from Veronica's control. If that is so, I do not entirely blame him. I continue to drive to Sunnydale a few times each year now. It took a great deal of courage to return, but I cannot forgo seeing my parents. I have become much more cautious on those roads, and I advise you to be careful if you ever visit. Bruno may no longer be under Veronica's hold and might even have spared my life, yet I remain uncertain about the safety out there. The ravine held many broken bones, and I cannot be sure that none of them belonged to a human."